Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus said, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from the wedding banquet, so that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master finds alert when he comes. Truly I tell you, he will fasten his belt and have them sit down to eat, and he will come and serve them. If he comes during the middle of the night or near dawn and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. But know this, if the owner of the house had known what hour the thief was coming, he would not have to let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour." This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. Grace and peace to you on this day from God our Father and our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's pleasure to give you the kingdom. That is quite a promise, isn't it? It's a promise that's so big, it seems hard to believe. It seems hard to believe because we can't see it. What do we see? We see things like violence and hatred and anger, things like division, things like people being treated poorly, injustice, and indifference. We see it everywhere, right? I mean, we saw this happen last week with 2 mass shootings. We've seen it happen with manifestos that were written. We've seen it happen with the pundits and the politicians that pit us against each other. We see it everywhere, every day, all the time. And yet Jesus promises, do not fear. It is the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. The great theologian Yoda once said, well, actually, he didn't say it. Frank Oz said it, and George Lucas wrote it. But it's best said by Yoda. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. And we see that everywhere. At the beginning of worship, I had you write down some of the things you're afraid of. It's hard to do sometimes, to name it. You've handed them in. They're here in this basket. We've set them by the cross. One, it's just a good, easy location to put them. But I think there's a sign there, too. There's a sign that whatever it is that we are afraid of, that burdens us, that thief that comes in to destroy, Jesus meets us there. Those things don't have power over us. But what does have power over us is Christ's love and mercy. It's just hard to see it. So we have these great readings today. I found this cross yesterday while I was shopping with Mia. I must confess I was not looking for a cross, and I was not looking for a cross that had one of the verses from the readings for today on it. But lo and behold, there it was. It's a little bit of a different translation than we have, but you'll get the gist of it. It says, faith, being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we can't see. And yet, because we are human beings, we're auditory, sensory, visual, experiential animals, we want something to hold on to, something to see, something to hear, something that feels real. That's why these stories are so good. That's why they've been told for centuries, again and again and again. I mean, one of the things that whoever wrote Hebrews is preaching on, we think it's probably more of a sermon than a letter, is he kind of gives you a catalog of the people of faith. So first he starts with Abel and Enoch, who get dropped out in the lectionary, probably because they didn't think you knew who they were. And then we have Noah, who I just happen to have over here. Because the Bible camp kids, we studied Noah this week as one of our things. I mean, you know the story of Noah. It's this great story. It's, the ark, and it's the animals, and it's the storm. And if you think about it for a little while, you start to say, wow, that's pretty awful what happened actually in this story. Think of all that destruction, all of that wrath, all of that death. But the reason this story is told again and again and again is not because of that. It's because of Noah. It's because of building the ark, of doing the thing that you can't see yet, even though there's a promise. And these animals are fun to play with, and especially when you get to, like crocodiles and giraffes and stuff like that. It's really great. You always wonder, was there just one unicorn? But this story's not really about that either, right? It's about the promise at the end, when God puts the rainbow in the sky and promises to preserve humanity. And that especially as we look at our world that's so full of fear and anger and hate and suffering, what is God's promise to you? Don't be afraid, for it's God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And every time you see that rainbow in the sky, it's a reminder of that. It's a sign of that. I happened to see a rainbow almost 2 weeks ago. We were getting rid of our roosters for everybody's sake, including theirs. And we were driving back, and it had rained a little bit, and then the sun came out, perfect conditions, and there a beautiful rainbow stretched across the highway, and even snapped a picture right when we went by a church. So that was like, instead of a leprechaun at the end of the rainbow, it was a church steeple. It's really, I hope I am able to retrieve the picture now that my phone's kind of being funky. But it was great. And you think, okay, we know what a rainbow is. It's the way the light refracts through things. You can do it with a prism. You can do it through the water droplets, and it's our eyes playing tricks on us in a way. But it's this thing, right? It's this thing that God gives us. It's a reminder that even though we see fear and anger and hate and suffering in the world, and it seems like that thief has the upper hand, God's promise is, I've got you. Then Hebrews moves on to another story about Abraham, which Genesis also reflects. You know this story too. We've said it many times. Abram and Sarai, before their names are changed, are given this promise to leave the country they know and all the people they know and everything they know and go to this new land, and God will make of them a new nation that's supposed to be a blessing for the whole world. Their problem is they're getting on in years, and they think that this is kind of impossible. And they need reminders again and again and again that that God promised this, and it's going to happen. They have visitors come who meet them for lunch one day, and they serve them and greet them with hospitality, and they say to Sarai, "You're going to have a child," and she laughs. Of course, then when Isaac is born, she names him, God will laugh. Isaac. They sometimes take matters into their own hands and don't trust the promise, and bad things happen, and people are mistreated. And if you read the story of Hagar and then Ishmael, that lays it out. What happens when fear gets the upper hand in our lives? What we do to each other. And then there's this story here where God pulls Abraham aside and says, look at the sky. Look at all the stars in the sky. I hope this prop works. You're going to love it. It's great. I've been working on it all morning. You're going to see the stars in the night sky. And they're vastly numerous, more than you can count. That's how blessed you will be. That is your impact on the world. Do not be afraid, little flock. It's my good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And we look at the universe as we understand it today, and it seems to be even bigger and grander and more diverse and multiverse and all of these things that we can't even wrap our brains around. And our first reaction, just like the flood, is to get scared. Oh, wait a minute. that must mean I'm even that much more insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But what does God promise Abraham? And what does God promise each of us? I know you by name, and you are mine. Now go and bless others. Fear not, little flock, for it's my good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And then we have this story from Jesus. We know the story of Jesus. Did you know that these lights are hot? It's a good thing the air's on. Okay. I mean, what's the sign of Jesus? It's the cross, right? I mean, no matter what you know about Jesus or don't know about Jesus, just about everybody knows that, right? Where are we supposed to look for Jesus in the world, especially when we see fear and anger and hate and suffering and death and impunity and all the rest around us? It's at the cross. And of course, that is about forgiving you. And yes, that is about giving you new life where death does not have the upper hand. That thief cannot destroy. But it is also the place where Jesus shows up in the lives of others, in the suffering that we see around us, in the people whose lives are torn apart. Jesus promises to be there. That's where the kingdom starts. And because we forget that, and we're very good at forgetting that, Jesus, if you read down in this story what happens, he says, keep your lamp lit. So we're going to do that today. This is a hands-free lamp. Keep your light shining, right? Jesus says, you are the light of the world. You're a city on a hill. Don't put it under a basket. Right? Jesus tells us that. Stay up, watch, be alert. Where are you looking? What are the signs we have? We've got the rainbow. We've got the stars. We've got the cross. We've got each other. And if that's not enough, if you read down through this story, there's a little bit of a twist you might not have heard. When the master returns, he serves the servants rather than the other way around. And isn't that what we do when we gather together? To receive his mercy and grace and the meal, that feast he provides for all of us. Fear not, little flock. Do not be afraid. It is God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Think again about those fears that you wrote down. Think about the thief that comes. How easy would it be for us to take those fears and turn them into anger and hate and suffering? And the evidence is the world we live in, right? But think of the other side of it, where Christ comes to meet us and those in suffering, to give us not pain and despair, but hope and love and faith that sometimes seems hidden. But the promise comes to us again and again. Where do you see that? I mean, I saw it in a lot of things this past week. I had watched our church-wide assembly. I had kind of seen the agenda ahead of time. Those things, if you like parliamentary procedures, Marie, you'd love it. Great. There's a lot of that. I kind of said, okay, this will be kind of interesting, but not a lot going on, it seemed, on the surface. But some amazing things happened. Amazing things. We re-elected Bishop Eaton on the first ballot. That has never happened in the history of our church. We took important stands against racism and sexism and how we want to work with others in the world, not just other Christians, but other people of other faiths too. They had 40 people up front on the stage, just about any kind of religious faith you can think of, all there together. And one of the speakers said, you won't see this anywhere else. This is what we're lacking in our culture. We did things like I was supporting an action that was the Emmanuel 9 who had died tragically in Charleston at the hands of a mass shooter who grew up in a Lutheran congregation just like ours. It passed with only 8 dissenting votes out of 900 some. We don't do that. Usually they're like 2/3 votes, so we'll get by like 2/3 and maybe 5. You don't want to upset anybody. I mean, bold actions like that throughout this week, amazing. And as I mentioned before, the procession of all those women in stoles coming in for several minutes and dancing in the aisle. And a friend of mine, Tiffany Cheney, preaching the sermon, just outstanding. Makes you feel good to be church. Do not fear, little flock. It's God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And we saw it in our hallways and in this gathering room throughout the week too, with 8, 9, 12 kids, kind of depended on the day. Little ones. You saw it in their joy together. You saw it in them building community together. We had these little skits, but it went beyond the skits to the way they were not just learning the Bible stories like Noah here, but even how they were treating each other. And one of them, Maddie, who usually sits in the corner in the kid area, she'd say, "Looks like another sign of the fruit of the Spirit." And then we'd ask them, which one, right? All of them, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. They'd name them all. They got it. This is the sign of who we are together. I saw it a couple of weeks ago when we took a bunch of teenagers and other adults into New Haven to do all those work projects. And again, it's not because here we are with all this great stuff to share and we're going to do it to them. It was about building community together. It was about learning from each other. It's about restoring wholeness and what it means to be community as the people of God. And especially in a world where all you see is fear and anger and violence and suffering. Goodness, hope, love, faith together. I mean, I see it in Cassie over there, who was raised in this congregation and surrounded by your love and faith and that of her family, who was nurtured in leadership, who today we're sending out to serve the church as a whole. And that congregation is going to be very, very blessed by her, as we have been. I mean, God's on the move, right? Do not be afraid. Fear not, little flock. It's God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Look for the signs. The rainbow, the stars, the cross, one another. Be that sign for someone who needs to see it. Amen.